Hello and welcome to this Grand Prix Lille. We are now fast getting through. We're in round 13 of 15 here. Not long now before our top 8 is all locked up, and we're going to get a chance to see Turbo Fog in the hands of Andreas Gans. One of the decks that wasn't represented by too many people in Day 2. I think just 5 players made it through to Day 2 with this list, but Gans still high enough in the standings that he can very reasonably be looking at making a challenge for top 8 here. Turbo Fog, a deck that is very, very good against aggro strategies. It's able to lock down the attack step and at some point take a lot of extra turns. Here it finds itself against Is It Phoenix. How would you expect this matchup to go, Moraine?
I think it's one hard to call. The Is It deck is fast. I mean, if an Enigma Drake is gonna do a lot of damage early on, so Andreas might find himself in a position where he needs to start fogging from turn, let's say 6 or 7 onwards. And if he cannot find enough fogs, then it's gonna be hard. One thing that he's got going is that there's no main deck counters in Raúl Porojan deck, so once he gets these critical numbers of fogs, I think he's gonna pull ahead game 1. Game 2 and 3, Raúl might actually bring in some counter spells, although I only see one negate. So I would say Andreas is a little bit favored in this matchup.
So early doors for Porojan with his Phoenix deck. He's already got Enigma Drake in play, one of the various Drakes that might be in this list. It's going to be about casting lots of spells. Spells in the graveyard means bigger Drakes, which means more damage and potentially pressure to cast more fogs sooner. Andreas Gans, for now, has got Khan Scion of Urza in play and will be looking at sort of just getting up on cards where he can until that point where he has to start casting fog effects. Now, by fog effects, we mean effects that shut down combat damage. Shock to the head here puts Andreas Gans to 18, but also triggers Arclight Phoenix and means Enigma Drake is bigger. So a nice sequence of events there for Raúl Porojan. Gets to attack and kill Khan Scion of Urza in spite of the fact that it was up all the way at 6 loyalty.
Yeah, exactly 6 damage. Now Teferi is gonna come down, and I do believe
Amount of sort of reinforcing the position that he's currently. Either Fogs or Nexus of Fate and essentially take all of the important turns.
now at 6 mana, he's still 1 mana short of Nexus of Fate, but one trick he could actually use is tap 2 mana in my end step, untap it, and then add 5 more to go for Nexus of Fate. So despite only having 6 lands, he is actually able to play Nexus of Fate already.
And anytime you're taking additional turns, having Planeswalkers in play is pretty decent. You get to activate that Planeswalker in addition to drawing your card, playing your land, and so on and so forth. But especially so with the likes of Teferi ticking up at some point, Teferi can go for his ultimate. And at that point, every time you're drawing cards, you're exiling permanents. And exiling permanents makes life very tricky on opponents actually winning the game. So going up to 7 loyalty now to draw a card. There will be 2 lands getting untapped at the end of Andreas Gans' turn now.
Yeah, and keep in mind that once he has a Gift of Paradise actually the untap 2 becomes untap kind of 3 lands, and that's when it starts to really become dangerous. With 4 Chemister Insight and 4 Chart a Course, he actually does have quite some card draw in his deck.
Chart, of course, it just seems to be very well positioned in this exact standard metagame. It seems like almost all of the blue decks have value in being able to pay 2 mana to draw 2 and either discard 1 if they've not attacked or just straightforwardly draw 2 for 2 mana.
Yeah. So now we find a second copy of Pause for Reflection. Probably is still gonna play the Gifts of Paradise. I don't think he can play Karn. I don't think well, actually, did he play a land yet? Last turn, yeah, he's already played a land, so he cannot go for Karn, untap to. He did not. The Fury at 7. Yeah, actually.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. So now he can actually play Karn and untap 2, but he's going to go for Gifts of Paradise on my Glacial Fortress. I usually like my Gifts of Paradise on a basic land because of the likes of Field of Ruin. But I guess the blue-red Izzet Phoenix deck usually doesn't run Field of Ruin. So no reason to play around that one.
Raul Porojan, it seems like a while ago that he last had a turn, and that's because 2 turns in a row for Andreas Gantz. And Gantz with enough mana now that he ought to be able to hold off a lot of what's going on the other side of things. Doesn't mind too much seeing a Crackling Drake resolve. Ultimately, just another body. Yes, it draws a card when it comes into play, but in and of itself, going at Andreas. Don't forget the +1/+1, of course, from Maximize Velocity itself. Ultimately, all rendered moot by another fog effect on the other side of the table, though.
Yeah, and Raul has a lot of dead cards in his main deck. Lava Coil, Beacon Bolt. Actually, they're both one-off, so he was kind of unfortunate to draw both. He's got 4 Shocks. These at least can still be aimed at Andreas, but it probably wouldn't have mattered since Andreas is still at a very healthy 19 life. And now Karn. Now it's really all about finding Nexus of Fate to get more and more value every turn.
Lots of Planeswalkers in play. Does not currently appear to have Nexus of Fate active, but we will see soon enough. Looks like a search for Azcanta. This is a very important element to what the Turbo Fog deck has going on. At some point, it's going to be able to use Teferi to potentially, on a transformed Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, activate Azcanta twice, and that can get really out of hand when it comes to digging and finding extra turns.
Yeah, at this point, all Andreas has to do is find either a Fog or a Nexus of Fate in like the top 5 to top 10 cards. Because he's looking at a lot of cards each turn. With Teferi, with Azcanta that is going to be flipped. So it should be easy for him to find one of the 8 Fogs. Well, there's 6 left, 5 left. Or one of the 4 Nexus of Fate. One thing that's good about Nexus of Fate is that it gets shuffled back. So the density of the amount of Nexus of Fate in your deck always increases. Well, the density, I would say. The amount is always stay the same.
And each and every attack step, Raul Porojan has to at least consider the notion that he might be able to successfully get damage through. So here you see him attempting to off each and every Planeswalker on the table while getting through a little bit of extra damage. We'll see how that one works out. Not so well. Who knew? Turbo Fog living up to its name, at least in the Fog capacity, if not the Turbo.
Now search. There's 6 cards in the graveyard. So if he keeps that 1 card, it must be a very good one. Otherwise, he would always put the 7th card in his graveyard. And it seems like it was a Nexus of Fate.
Nexus of Fate, a relatively straightforward one. Cast it, shuffle it back into your deck. You're going to be taking an extra turn, but now you get to use a bunch of Planeswalkers.
Yeah. And notice that he plays the Nexus of Fate before using his Teferi and before using his Karn, just because he wants that extra copy of Nexus of Fate in his deck before using the 2 powerful Planeswalkers.
Karn ticks up. And we get to see that there's a Nexus of Fate and a Chemist's Insight. In some respects, it's a bit frustrating to have Nexus of Fate with a silver counter on it, because it means that next turn you're going to have to be using Karn to draw into it rather than do the natural draw of it, which could, at this point, be a little bit easier. Though I guess, given that he already has a turn in the bank, not too big a worry there.
Yeah, now untaps 2. Chemist's Insight at instant speed. He's looking at a lot of cards next turn, and he's already got the Nexus of Fate, so I think Andreas should have this game locked up. I guess it's gonna take some time because he needs to find a kill condition. Let's actually take a look at his kill condition. Is it just Karn? 2 Karn, I don't see. Yeah, I think that's gonna be it. Just make a bunch of artifact tokens with Karn. So it's gonna take some time, but I do believe he's got it locked up.
I mean, he also has the option at some point of hitting Teferi's ultimate, exiling the various permanents that Raul has going on, just so that even if it works out that he does pass back the turn at some point, there's a limited amount that Porojan will be able to get up to. But yeah, relatively soon we may see some Karn constructs coming along. For now, the copies of Nexus of Fate sat with silver counters on them, only racking up. And an activation of Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. So digging deep for a spell. Finds a fog.
Yeah.
That's enough for Raul to pick up his cards. He knows that the amount of extra turns he's going to have to worry about is substantial. And realistically, at some point, consideration of the clock does become a factor. Even though there's, a little under 40 minutes left on the round, his likelihood of actually being able to get through for meaningful damage at that point, very low indeed. And Porojan elects to instead try and win too quickly on the bounce rather than indulging Andreas Gantz with allowing that joke of a game to go on any further.
I think Raul is happy to grab his Cyborg because he does have 2 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Negate, maybe 2 copies of Niv-Mizzet Parun that's coming in as well.
I mean, even a Fine Minds Research could be a bit of a problem, because once it's on the battlefield, it represents a source of damage that does not require the attack step to be able to get through.
Yep, that's also might be a little bit too slow, because you do have to play these 5 instants or sorceries. So it's going to require like 2 or 3 turns to set up, but it's some sort of that. He does have quite some cards which he is happy to bring out. Beacon Ball, Lava Coil, Dive Down he's also playing. These are cards that are definitely coming out.
Now, in principle, Andreas Gantz can go for a bit of a transformational sideboard if he so chooses. He does have 4 copies of Carnage Tyrant in his sideboard, and these are the kind of threats that aren't necessarily ubiquitous from a Turbo Fog list. He can suddenly turn things around, and if he needs to win a game fast, or if he wants to surprise an opponent that's removed their removal spells, Carnage Tyrant on its own can just close out games.
Yep, I think Carnage Tyrant is mainly against the control matchups. Not really sure if he wants it against the Is It Phoenix decks. Probably doesn't want it against Black-Green midrange either. I wonder how the Turbo Fog matchup against Black-Green midrange would play out. I think game 1, Turbo Fog is definitely favored. But after Cyber, once once the Black-Green midrange deck gets to bring in 4 Duress, might actually become a lot harder for the Turbo Fog to function.
And based on Andreas Gantz's record of 10-1-1, it seems like he has some sort of a plan against Black-Green. I'd be stunned if he's managed to dodge that bullet for the entirety of the tournament thus far. Already 12 rounds in, 3 rounds to go. This is our round 13 in progress. Right now, Andreas Gantz up a game, 35 minutes in order to find 1 more game win to go to 11-1-1. All the ones.
Yep.
Raul Porojan will be on the play for this second game. The Is It Phoenix deck, one that I've quite enjoyed watching. Some of them have more Drakes than others. This one has Crackling and Enigma Drake, meaning that there's a fair few flyers that can all hit for a bunch of damage, though obviously the more drakes you include, that means the fewer spells that you have in your list, so perhaps not quite as explosive a set of Arclight Phoenixes. Though I feel like we've barely seen the much talked about but thus far somewhat elusive draw 3 Arclight Phoenixes so that you get to start going absolutely loopy with getting them all back by casting 3 spells.
I think the perfect number of drakes next to your phoenixes, because I do still want to run 4 Goblin Electromancer. Raul only has 3, but I think it's just too powerful if it sticks to not play 4. I think you want 4 Phoenix for sure, and besides that, I'd say 3 Drakes, maybe 4, but I would not play 7 as Raul does. It is a lot more explosive though. Raul has 4 Enigma Drake and 2 Maximize Velocity, so that could really, that's like a 1-2 punch, can easily kill your opponent out of nowhere. But the problem is he's only running 1 Discovery Dispersal. He's also got 3 Tormenting Voice, so he actually has quite some instant or sorceries left in his deck.
Now, one thing that's worth noting for the Izzet Phoenix list is that it's one of the decks in the format that gets to lean on the fact that it's got so much card drawing and actually have a comparatively low land count. Just the 21 lands in this particular list, but that's supported with a lot of card drawing, starting at Opt. Then we've got our Discovery Dispersals, we've got our Radical Ideas, Tormenting Voices, Charter Course. This is a deck that can reliably get to the lands that it needs without having to include quite so many. So that does free up a few spell slots.
That looks like a very decent hand for Raul. Although I'm not sure if he actually has a second land, but I do believe he has the Opt. And if he finds a second land with Opt, he's got a turn 2 Tormenting Voice, and then it should be fine. So let's see if he finds, there it is, the island. So now we're probably going to see Tormenting Voice discarding the he also has the Electromancer, so perfect draw there. We could already see a Phoenix attacking next turn.
Tormenting Voice, perfect for letting you get Arclight Phoenix into the graveyard. Obviously, it's a little bit of a worry that even if it gets countered, you still have to discard a card as part of the cost.
Tormenting Voice a little bit dangerous in that if it gets countered, you do lose out on 2 cards, but it's a perfect discard outlet for the Arclight Phoenix and requires less mana than Radical ID.
Charter Course as well. And finally, Radical Idea. So we will be seeing Arclight Phoenix coming back.
Yeah, much better draw here for Raul. 5 damage on turn 3 is what he wants to be doing. And now he just wants to draw 1 Negate or 1 Disdainful Stroke to protect himself from Teferi or Fog Effects.
Yeah, the threat's already on the battlefield now for Raul Porojan. He can just focus on making sure that the Turbo Fog player doesn't achieve too terribly much in these early stages. Cleansing Nova in hand, though, for Andreas Gantz, so at some point he may be able to deal with all these creatures in one fell swoop.
I'm not even sure Cleansing Nova is that good in this matchup, because the Arclight Phoenix will probably come back. A little bit dangerous, although since Raul is playing quite some Drakes, I guess it's still worth it. I'm surprised to still see that dive down in the deck from Raul.
There's one in the main and one on the sideboard, so it's unclear whether or not he simply had better things to side out, or maybe even brought an extra one in, though I'm not quite sure what he would have been playing around if that were the case.
He does have the negate, so that is a crucial part, but the +0/+3 doesn't protect your creatures from the fog effect. I don't see any targeted removal. Well, there usually isn't. Maybe in the sideboard, but nope. I'm a little bit surprised by this little dive down after sideboard.
I mean, I guess that it does keep up your spell count. Assuming you've got a creature in play, it means that you've got more one-cost spells.
Yeah.
So our first Root Snare of the game already being played there by Andreas Gantz. And he's going to be under pressure to use those fog effects early and often here. And even with just 1 mana up here, if there's a negate from Raul Porojan, it will be enough to stop Teferi thanks to that Goblin Electromancer.
I guess one thing it does is protect your creature against Teferi. That might be a use that comes up sometimes. But just as a spell, yeah, it might not be strong enough.
All right, there's Teferi. Do we have an answer on the other side of things? Yep, 1 mana for Disdainful Stroke thanks to Goblin Electromancer. That's exactly what Raul Porojan needed to be able to maximize his impact here. He's already got 5 power on the battlefield. If he can cast 3 spells this turn, which is very doable, that would be 8 damage. As it stands, though, 5 and the follow-up of a Firemind's Research. Tough, tough times for Andreas Gantz here. Still 1 mana available and a negate sat at the very front of Raoul Porojan's hand. Uncertain as to what it can be that it's going to be good enough for Gantz at this stage.
Yeah, Goblin Electromancer has done so much work in this game. Once again, with only 3 lands, Raoul was perfectly able to develop his board and still protect him from something like the Fairy. With just 1 blue mana up, just great.
Step 1, might as well attack, force some sort of activity from Gantz. He does have another fog effect, but a negate on that means that there's going to have to be still more ways of shutting down the combat step. Root Snare coming along as well. If there's more counter magic now, that would be enough to close it out. As things stand, though, he's forced Andreas Gantz to burn through more resources than he might otherwise have wanted to in that turn. He's got lethal damage on the board in his creatures, and Firemind's Research gradually ticking up as another way that Gantz could potentially be shuffling up and going to a game of 3.
I think Raoul is a little bit Drake flooded. If Andreas gets to resolve that Cleansing Nova, there might be a way out. Sure, the Firemind's Research is at 2 counters. I think Raoul should actually just draw a card in the hopes of finding enough spells to get back these Phoenixes. The problem is that one of his spells is the Dive Down, which won't have any targets.
Well, I mean, Dive Down in response to Cleansing Nova just to be another spell cast for a counter on Firemind's Research seems like it might end up being good enough.
Yeah, it might actually be an option he should consider. In the perfect world, he would use that Dive Down as a 3rd spell to reanimate his Phoenixes, but that's not going to be possible if there's no creature in play. Let's see what he draws here.
And the one concern in terms of his Firemind's Research plan going poorly is Teferi, but if there's a maximized velocity somewhere in the mix here, he may be able to close things out right now. Crackling Drake resolves but does not get given haste with the 1 mana sorcery.
Crackling Drake has been so good so far this tournament. Just a big flyer, good blocker, good attacker, card advantage, pretty much everything you want from a creature. The Izzet control decks are playing it, the Izzet Phoenix decks are playing it. It's been really doing a lot of work.
All right, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria coming along. Plus for now, so going up to 5 loyalty, going to get to untap some lands. It seems like a bit of an ask for Raoul Porojan to have 3 spells plus 2 mana to be able to burn out Andreas this very turn. But even if he goes partway down that route, it's still going to be pretty good. The Crackling Drake representing a lethal attacker here, so it will prompt more activity on the other side of the table. And
Pause for reflection.
And then having done that, Raoul Porojan will have to find a different way of winning the game. Goes for another copy of Crackling Drake.
The problem with all these Drakes is that he's not ticking up his Firemind's Research. Same with Search for Ascanta. Sure, it's fine, but if now Andreas finds Nexus of Fate and he can start chaining, Raoul actually gets punished for having so many Drakes in his deck. He wasn't able to bring back these Phoenixes. Yeah, there we go. Andreas is starting the Nexus of Fate loop. Can he produce enough turns? His 1 attack should be enough for Raoul, but I'm afraid he might not get that extra turn.
Yeah, gets to cast Nexus of Fate. Teferi has still not used an ability yet this turn.
Especially in a matchup like this, where you only want 1 or 2 creatures, having so many creatures is a problem.
Yeah, from here on out, further creatures, essentially dead draws. All that Raoul Porojan wants is to just throw a few spells together so that he can get Firemind's Research going. But Teferi at any point could take that Firemind's Research off the table, at least briefly, reset all the counters on it, and that still leaves Gantz in an awkward spot. All right, up to 7 now. Dig, dig, dig for Andreas Gantz. Obviously, the ideal would be to find another way of taking an additional turn here. Doesn't look like that's on the cards.
I believe that's going to be a Karn. Still reconsidering. What he really wants is a search for Ascanta. Maybe some more mana with Gifts of Paradise. Gain also some life so he gets out of Firemind's research range. There we go. Goes up to 8. That's actually crucial. Now he doesn't die to a single activation of Firemind's research. And the creatures he should be able to fog with Pause for Reflection or Root Snare.
Ticks up Karn now. Reveals a couple of lands. Not the toughest of decisions for Alporogen there. Literally 2 identical copies of Hinterland Harbour revealed off Karn.
Now search for Ascanta and still 3 mana up after this. This is looking better and better for Andreas Gans. Raul Porrean had a very good draw. Turn 2, Goblin. Turn 3, reanimate my Phoenix and double counters. But it seems like he was not able to close the door. And
Ascanta transforming now, so there's a little bit of extra mana to work with.
The problem is with his build is that he's only got 1 negate, so he can't even dig for 1 more.
I mean, yes, these Drakes are attacking for a colossal amount, but...
Oh, he doesn't...
Oh, wow!
Was
Did Andreas Gans just not have any more fog effects?
Nope.
It looks a little bit that way. Sometimes you can't continue to draw them, and that means that Raul Porrean has managed to square things up. Gans put in a great effort there, had almost all the pieces of the puzzle there, but when your Turbo Fog deck doesn't have fogs, well, it turns out it doesn't have a whole lot, and we're going to be going to a game 3.
Yeah, I was not expecting that one. I really thought Andreas Gans had another fog effect. If he would have had one, next turn would have given him activation from Ascanta the Sunken Ruin, Teferi draw, and Karn activation. I think he would have run away with the game, but nope, no fog there. And Raul having the good draw early on with 1 little hit from the Drakes, it was just enough.
And that's one of the cool things about this Is It Phoenix Drake deck, or indeed you could potentially even just call it a Drake deck. This one has got 7 Drakes in, is that those Drakes, they don't need to get very many hits in to just win the game. It's not like you've got your you've only got your Arclight Phoenix, it's hitting in for 3 and that's a 7-turn clock. No, when these Drakes hit, they could potentially hit for somewhere between 6 and 10, 12 or so. And when they're hitting that hard, the game can be over very, very quickly indeed once the Is It Phoenix deck starts attacking. Gans now back to his sideboard. He is going to be on the play in this deciding game. A little over 20 minutes left on the round. Gans already has 1 draw. Picking up a second draw now likely means that he's going to be in rough spot to potentially make top 8. Each of these players really do want to carry on winning. If Raul picked up a second loss here, he might be fine. Andreas Gans, though, X2 and 1, that is definitely a dangerous spot to be in.
Yeah, 1,400-ish players. Not a lot of draws in this format. Well, the black-green decks, they are kind of slow, but I haven't seen that many draws so far. So X2 and 1 should probably not be enough to make top 8.
X1 and 2 might be in a reasonable spot, but you'd much rather actually just win your rounds every round where you can.
X and 2 is where you want to go.
Both of these players, regulars on the European Grand Prix circuit. We've seen both of them in the feature match area a fair amount. Andreas Gans also has been on his national team a number of times, a very seasoned player when it comes to playing at the highest level.
Yeah, has also played a bunch of Pro Tours. Hasn't really had any top 8s at the Pro Tour, I think.
I don't believe so, but nonetheless, certainly one of the players to watch out for, especially at the Grand Prix level.
Yeah. He's definitely... I think he's got like three GP top 8s or something. I believe he's also got a team one where he did very well. And always I don't remind him playing the best deck in the format. I think he's always trying to find something that not everyone is expecting.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely space for that, especially in these early days of the format where people come with preconceptions that are largely just based off their own limited testing, because we've not got lots of results already in the bank when it comes to this standard format. So there's definitely room for innovation in these early stages. We've got a Pro Tour still to come, which will, for a lot of people, be the real litmus test on the format, providing a lot of information as to what the best players in the game feel is the winning strategy for standard. But then that doesn't mean to say, even after the Pro Tour, that we won't have innovation and gradually people getting to the best deck as both of these players go down to 6. On one side, it was a lot of land. On the other side, not enough. Between the two of them, they could probably have made some beautiful hands, but that's not how this game's played.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if Raul would have been happy with all these fogs. Andreas would have been happy with one island, though. He had Charter Course, Glacial Fortress, and 5 non-lands. One island would have been enough to keep. One thing I like about the Is It Phoenix decks is that usually you have a hand at 7 you can keep. With all of the card draw, with Charter Course, with Tormenting Voice, with Discovery Dispersal, you can keep most of your 3 to 4 lands, 3 spells to 4 spells. This hand, of course, was like 6 lands, I believe. That's, of course, an exception. But you're not running, as you said, 21, 22 lands, so it shouldn't happen all that often that you have 5, 6, or 7 lands.
Yeah, doing the math on how many lands you want in your deck it can be a bit of a minefield, really, because it's not just down to going, well, where does my curve stop, though that's a reasonable first iteration. If you've got enough card drawing, at some point it does let you dip a tiny bit lower on land count than you might otherwise think is reasonable. An idea originally sort of pioneered by Alan Comer, really pushing at how low you can go on land counts. And it's something that we see across all formats getting toyed with a little bit, but 21 in standard is pretty low in terms of the number of lands being played, especially for a deck that has a bunch of spells that cost 4.
I'm not sure how good Niv Mizzet is in this matchup. Sure, if it stays in play every time Andreas plays a Nexus of Fate, it deals 1 damage. But once Andreas is chaining Nexus of Fate, he can probably afford to -3 Teferi. So I'm not sure how good Niv Mizzet is in this matchup. I don't think you want to tap out on turn 6 or 7, because then it will just get killed by Teferi, and then the chain is on.
In terms of what Andreas Gans has going on here, it looks like he is well on his way to being able to put something together. He has early card drawing. It looks like he already has some fog effects in hand, and right now he's not being pressured to use them anytime soon. And I believe that he also has a Cleansing Nova so that he can kind of allow Raul to build up a scary-looking board and then deal with it all in one fell swoop.
I think he's not found a 4th land. He has to say go on turn number 4. Of course, not able to play any of his expensive spells. How many lands is in the typical fog deck? Is it like 25, 26, 7, 11, 20? Yeah, it's 26. So a little bit unfortunate. If he finds a 4th land, he can actually get going with Chemister's Insight.
Opt coming here from Raul Porojan. He already has 1 Arclight Phoenix briefly in the graveyard that is now getting a chance to swing in here. And when the Phoenix comes into play from the graveyard, it almost feels incidental to all of the deck manipulation that the Is It deck is going with. Tobias Enker and I were trying to figure out the optimal deck name for this one. His suggestion was iFern, so knock the IX off the end of Phoenix and just have I for Is It. My suggestion was just the word Phoenix with a question mark at the end. But one way or another, this deck seems like it's going to be one we're going to see in the feature match area for a fair amount in this standard format, as we see a Charter Course coming for Andreas Gans, digging desperately for lands. Crackling Drake and Arclight Phoenix already in play for Raul Porojan, so his damage kind of sorted for the mid-game at this point.
I like the inclusion of a copy of Search for Ascanta in the Is It Phoenix deck. It's another angle. You attack your opponent. It's an enchantment that turns into a very important land. You usually have enough spells to actually flip it. And there we're going to see it. I think it's already 7, so it is going to flip, produce a very big advantage for Raul, being able to search up counter spells in order to counter the root snares and the pause for reflections. I would have loved to see like 1 or 2 more copies of Negate, because he's only got 1, which is not a lot if you need to be countering 2 or 3 mana instant or sorcery spells.
Yeah, as Counter the Sunken Ruin, also on occasion useful simply due to the fact that it taps for blue. There are occasions that you just want to cast a lot of spells in one turn, and even with Goblin Electromancer, you may need a bit of extra mana to do so, as a Root Snare comes down and stops that attack from Raul Porojan. Yeah, as Cantor, at the moment, passing up, drawing additional cards, but at some point in the future may well end up simply meaning that Raul Porojan can have the one big turn.
And here you see why Niv Mizzet is not that good. Raul could have played it. He had 6 mana, but yeah, he would have just lost it to Cleansing Nova. So not really sure if Niv Mizzet is the right card. Of course, it can deal the last 2 or 3 damage, but there's always the chance that your opponent has Cleansing Nova. Not really sure if every Turbo Fog deck runs it. Most of them only run 1 or 2. I see Andreas actually has 1 in the main deck and 2 in the sideboard, so I do like it as an answer to green-black. Killing all the creatures from green-black, including Carnage Tyrant, is crucial.
So that was Azcan to the Sunken Ruin, finding Radical Idea, drawing a card for Raul Porojan, meaning that it is 5 damage coming through from the Crackling Drake, 8 in total. So this is not an attack that Andreas Gantz has to use a fog on, and in some respects, not using it there, a good call, because those attacks are only going to get scarier later, and it means he's got mana up to be able to cast Chemist's Insight with Jumpstart from the graveyard, discarding a Teferi, which is a little bit surprising.
Yeah, he didn't fog last turn. He did fog last turn because at that point he could not flashback the Chemist's Insight anyways. He only had 2 mana up. In this turn, he really needed to draw some more cards. Didn't fog because he could take some more damage and then flashback the Chemist's. He did discard the Teferi probably because he's holding another copy, I'd say. Now Raul is probably reading Azcanta the Sunken Ruin whether or not he can take Fireman's Research. He can actually take it. It says non-creature spell. So he can take the enchantment and put it in his hand. And with Andreas already at 6 life, this is going to be a tough game for Andreas to win. He needs to fog every turn and also make sure that the Firemind's Research doesn't kill him.
Yeah, Raul Porojan having a pretty solid draw here in spite of the mulligan that he started with. Pause reflection there coming from Andreas Gantz.
The good thing is that he's still got 4 mana, so he can flashback Chemist's Insight this turn. That's a good thing. But he will need to find Teferi soon, otherwise he will probably run out of counter spells. Discard the island. He's still holding quite a lot of cards though. But one of the main problems he has at this point is that Teferi is very expensive and hard to resolve. If he ever goes for Teferi and Raul has like 2 counters, he's probably losing the battle. He would need a lot of lands to protect that one.
Firemind's Research doesn't need very much help to close out this game. The creatures, again, are going to do a fair amount of damage here. Andreas Gantz being attacked on 2 different fronts, and his deck only really well set up to defend one of them at a time. 12 minutes left on this clock, but for Raul Porojan, that ought to be plenty. Even for Andreas Gantz, if he does turn a corner, he ought to be able to find a way of getting things going. And Opt here, in part, just to put a counter on that Firemind's Research, also, of course, does pump up the Crackling Drake and improve the draws of Raul Porojan. Opt just getting better and better these days.
Yeah, Opt has been phenomenal in Standard. Yeah,
big swings coming through. Let's see another fog effect. There it is.
And Raul doesn't have to start using his counter spells. All he needs to do is make sure Teferi does not resolve. That's the most important card. If Teferi is not gonna hit play, he's probably gonna win soon. Although Andreas is drawing quite some cards. He's on his 3rd Chemist's Insight. So the longer the games go, the bigger the chance is he will have enough mana to protect his Teferi once he plays it. He's now at 5, 6, 7, 8 lands. So let's say he plays Teferi, he's got 3 mana up. That's only 1 counter spell. probably still too early to go for Teferi. I think the perfect number is 9 lands, so you have 5, which means you have 4 up, so you can double negate or negate plus. Does he have another way to protect it? Syncopate, but that's not gonna work. He's actually only got 2 negates in his deck.
So here's a Cleansing Nova, and immediate Disdainful Stroke coming from Raul Porojan. And this potentially a big problem for Andreas Gans. He's still got mana up so that in principle he could find himself a Fog effect. But Raul here, he's the one that's activating Azcan to the Sunken Ruin. Finding any spell for him is great just because he's got Fine Mind's Research in play. But with Opt as well, he's going to be very close to being able to use that Fine Mind's Research for damage this very next turn. And in fact, there is the handshake. Raul Porojan, he had a tough game 1, and game 2, honestly, was hanging by a thread for him. It seemed like Andreas Gans had everything that he needed, couldn't string together the fogs in game 2, and in game 3, well, a combination of creatures and that Fine Mind's Research being enough to mean that the Izzet deck advancing through there. Raul Porojan now at 12-1 with a couple of rounds to go. That puts him in fantastic position to potentially lock up a top 8 slot here in Lille. We will have some more Magic for you soon enough. Do not go anywhere. And Tim Willoughby and Moraine Lebert here will bring you a little bit of Time Walk Magic after these messages. Hello and welcome back. It's Grand Prix Lille. I'm Tim Willoughby. This is Moraine Lebert, and we have yet more magic for you here from round 13 of the Grand Prix. The format is standard. Guilds of Ravnica very much in evidence. We're all getting a feel for what the standard format might happen to shake out like at the Pro Tour in Atlanta in a couple of weeks. A few cats out of bags maybe, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's a few more surprises in a couple of weeks' time. But for this round, we've got some Time Walk magic for you. We're going to head back down to our feature match area to see, in the hands of Christian Hauck, Golgari mid-range, just a mysterious mid-range deck from Christopher Larsen, though by the looks of things, he also has lands and Lamoire Elves, though of a different vintage to those of Christian Hauck, currently the 23rd ranked player in the world.
Yeah, we've seen Christian Hauck in the feature match before. He's on the 4 Carnage Tyrant 4 Find Finality plan, which is something Simon Gerson has been liking quite a lot. He feels like that's the way the mirror needs to be approached, and let's see if it's going to work out for him in this particular match.
Yeah, we see the Wild Growth Walker coming down, and that's something that can be very potent indeed for the green-black lists if they get lots of Explorers in play. Right now, though, no sign of further exploration from Christopher Larsen. He's playing things a little cagey, while Christian Hauck gets down a Midnight Reaper, which will mean that every creature of his that gets killed off, it's going to cost him a point of life, but he'll get to draw a card for the trouble. This is one of those matchups where things like Carnage Tyrant can be a very big deal indeed. But the life gain off Wild Growth Walker also pretty potent. It does now mean that he also has a sizable enough blocker that attacks on the ground of Christian Hauck are going to get a little bit more complicated. Jadelight Ranger does get left on top. Such great synergy with that Wild Growth Walker that I wouldn't be surprised at all if it worked out that if there is removal in Christian Hauck's hand, that he may have to use it on the Wild Growth Walker.
Yeah, the Wild Growth Walker really starts to shine in this matchup once it goes bigger than 4 toughness. Then it suddenly doesn't die anymore to find finality. So your opponent will have to find, for example, a Ravenous Chupacabra or an Assassin's Trophy to deal with it. Christian Hauck doesn't have any main deck Wild Growth Walker. Wild Growth Walker is mainly good against the aggro decks. I do like the approach of putting them in the sideboard. I found them to be really good against the aggro decks, but not as good in the mirror or against control.
So there we saw Midnight Reaper getting involved, offering a trade with the Sentry, and Christopher Larsen taking it, gets the Reaper off the board comparatively cheaply, only 1 creature dying and drawing cards for Hauck, and Jadelight Ranger revealing a Ravenous Chupacabra. The Chupacabra, a straightforward 2-for-1. The 2/2 creature often has a way of removing something and dealing damage, but right now it seems like Christopher Larsen wants to dig for something better.
Yeah. Last turn, Christian actually had the opportunity to play a Carnage Tyrant instead of the Ravenous Chupacabra, but he saw that if he dealt with the Wild Growth Walker, he would be able to attack with the Midnight Reaper and the Branch Walker, which would net him a card and get in some damage, which is actually crucial if your plan is on attacking with the 7/6 dinosaur. And Christopher Larsen does not find a 6th land.
Yeah, that Lamoirel's being leaned on very hard now, even to just find double green. Golgari Findbroker will be able to get a couple of creatures back from the graveyard, but not enough lands to then be able to cast any of them. Nothing that's going to be too great here. I mean, obviously you can multiple block the Carnage Tyrant. That's one way of getting the big hexproof monster off the battlefield. But you're losing cards in doing so, and the Golgari Findbroker gets back that Ravenous Chupacabra that was explored into the graveyard. And for now, Christopher Larsen just kind of has to hope that he finds lands on the top of his deck, because Vivian Reed, Carnage Tyrant, these are the kind of cards that can swing this matchup around. But right now he can't cast them, even though he's got them in hand.
Christopher could have played Vivian Reed instead of Findbroker, which would have probably found him the 6th land, but he would have been too far behind. By adding the Findbroker to the board, Christian Hauck doesn't really have any good attacks. Even the attack with the Carnage Tyrant is not that good, because we will just see a double block from Christopher. So I think a good play by Christopher here, not committing the Planeswalker to the board.
And you can see Hauck having to have a good old think about what to do about this board. In this mid-range matchup, the boards can get kind of clogged. It's not necessarily an easy one to navigate.
Of course, another Ravenous Chupacabra would really punish the mana stumble from Christopher Larsen, or even a Vraska's Contempt. Let's see what he can add. Is it a Vivian Reed? Seems like it's 5 mana. Yeah, he's gonna. Yeah, Vivian Reed. Doesn't affect the board right away, but is probably gonna do a lot of work since Christian has the perfect blocks lined up. I'm not sure if Christian wants to attack here. He would trade with Jade Light Ranger and Fine Broker. I think it's just a little bit better to protect Vivian Reed and hope in the hopes of finding a Ravenous Chupacabra, for example, or maybe even a Memorial to Folly.
Druid of the Cowl in play in a couple of copies there for Christian Hauk. This one not ubiquitous in the green-black lists, but I quite like what it does. It's a 1/3 body which is solid enough on blocks, and it means you can much more consistently accelerate into the more powerful threats of the late game for Golgari mid-range. And even if you're doing things like casting Find, getting 2 creatures, being able to cast them both, this deck does have ways that it can utilize a lot of its mana.
And because Christian Hauk's deck contains 4 Tyrants, he's very likely to find a second one with the Vivian Reed. And I think his deck is just very well built, to be fair. He's really set up for the mirror. Carnage Tyrant is wonderful against control. And even against the Phoenix decks, you want to race. You don't want to play a long game, and you just want to run turn 4 Tyrant. I really like how his deck is built. Also playing Vivian Reed over other Planeswalker like Vraska is just because he wants to find Carnage Tyrant as early as possible.
So Christian there just elects to play a second Carnage Tyrant and pass things back. Larsen gradually dropping down in terms of potent threats on the battlefield here.
Problem is that Larsen, in 2 turns, he's facing an ultimate on Vivian Reed, and then he's certainly going to die because of all the creatures. So he kind of needs to find an answer next turn. Assassin's Trophy would be one, but usually these decks run like 1 or 2 copies, and it seems like Larsen doesn't even have a single one in the main deck.
Well, it's Carnage all round here. Each player has at least 1 Carnage Tyrant in play. Christian Hauk just found his 3rd with Vivian Reed, and Vivian is now all the way up to 8 loyalty. This is very much the danger zone. Even a Khan Sign of Urza on top, revealed to the Explorer from that Merfolk Branchwalker. Christian Hauk in fine shape here. Elects ultimately to put the Planeswalker into the graveyard, hoping he can do even better off the top of his deck. And that's enough for Christopher Larsen to scoop it up. In the face of Vivian Reed's ultimate, all of those Carnage Tyrants would be a little bit too potent. Now, in terms of the overall timings of things, sadly, we don't have the opportunity to bring you the conclusion of that match. But I will let you know that in spite of Christian Hauk picking up the game 1, it was Christopher Larsen who was ultimately victorious in that match, picking up the win 2-1. That's why we play best of 3, guys. It's not all just about game 1, but we will have more games for you very soon. We're going to have our 14th and penultimate round right after these messages.